Welcome to Morlock Me. This is a weekly podcast where we discuss books and their cinematic adaptations. We are back after our quite long week hiatus. Sorry about that. It was due to some unforeseen circumstances. Once again, I'm Charlie, and now I'm joined by our new co-host, because sadly Al has left us. So our new co-host is Michael.
Hello.
So Michael will be joining Morlock Me from now on, and we will be carrying on the same format as it was. So we'll now be back to being weekly. We're going to stop trying to take hiatuses.
Yes.
So today we're going to be talking about Spotlight, which was obviously has just won an Academy Award for Best Picture and also Best. I believe it's not adapted. It was Best Screenplay. I believe it was.
Yep.
The book version, which is Betrayal. Now, the book was originally put out, I believe, in the early 2000s. I believe it was maybe 2003, 2004, after the sort of the expose on the church came out. And then the one that's being sold now, that's got the film cover out, is I believe it's the newer edition, but it's got like updates on it. So
yeah, it's got like a 2015.
Yeah.
What has happened since?
Yeah.
Kind of
so
thing at the end, and a few bits and pieces in the actual text of the book.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about that one, and sort of because it's the first non-fiction we've talked about.
New things.
New things, exploring new worlds, and also it's kind of an interesting one because it's written by the Spotlight team.
Yes.
So it's and then obviously the film has got contributing factors.
And is about the Spotlight team.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of an odd one because it's they could have done a documentary.
Yes.
But they chose to turn it into a drama, and that's one of the really interesting things about what they've done with it, is they've made the film story about the journalism and brought the drama into it.
Yeah.
Whereas the book is very much about the case at hand.
Yes, like the book definitely reads as a journalistic piece. You can tell, which I quite like that it's not just by a certain someone featuring the Spotlight team. It is the Spotlight team writing it in their own words, what they found, and basically they're the best people to write it because they were the people that went through it all, really.
Yeah, definitely.
I think what did you think of the film first and foremost?
I thought the film was very good. It was interesting because the level of anger I felt with the film was very different to the book.
Yeah.
I thought that I would feel more detached from the book than I was, and I thought that I'd be angrier at the film than I was.
Yeah. I kind of think, like, when you read the book, like we discussed this, that you can't quite imagine that it's actually happened. It's it's a book, so you sort of feel like you could read it like fiction, like it's like not that you do, because obviously they've got the stats, but at the end of the day when you read it, they're numbers on a page. Like, I think when you actually see, like, what I think lends well to the film is that you do see them interviewing, not a lot, but they do see them interviewing the victims, and you sort of see that it's like, the people that they do get upset, they do break down, and you're like, it is actually real people, and like it does blow your mind because you do read these stats and you do read what they were doing and the paper trail and all these things that went on, but I feel that it's only when I think you can actually see it for yourself. Maybe, like, I don't know, maybe people reading the stats might feel it was a bit real, but for me, I feel seeing them actually interviewing victims was the knock-on effect of, this is actually a very real thing.
Yeah, that's the thing that was interesting to me, because I thought that I was going to agree with you, and I thought that I was going to feel very detached from the book.
Yeah.
But actually, it just hit so hard that so many priests had been doing this and nobody had done anything about it.
Yeah.
Or when they'd had the opportunity, some people had taken it and then the next person in the chain hadn't done it, and everybody just was doing what they perceived to be the easy thing.
Yeah. And
it was just this whole system failed.
Yeah.
Every single piece.
Yeah.
And what the film tried to do with that was it sort of pushed it onto the journalists as well, because one of the characters was working on a particular department at the time that got presented with this information, didn't move on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that was sort of upped in the film to make more drama.
Yeah, I when that sort of happened, we obviously, I've tried looking into it and I've not found whether or not that's true or not. But again, I agree with you. You don't know if it's just done for dramatic effect, that they're like,
to sort of drive a wedge into the team and make it feel like everybody, you know, or just maybe actually to make everybody seem more human.
Yeah, because I suppose it's, you know, I did enjoy the fact, well, not enjoy, I suppose that's probably the wrong word, but I did feel that what made it very interesting was the fact that there are, you know, they are people from Boston or near Boston, or grown up, or, you know, works in Boston. But the fact of the level of, you know, that Sasha, played by Rachel McAdams, she lives with her grandma who's Catholic. They've gone back to church. She's kind of like a relapsed Catholic.
Yeah.
They've all grown up in Catholic homes. They've all grown up with Catholic parents and possibly Catholic schools. They all went to church or mass and, you know, stuff like this. So they've all got that background of the religion. Some maybe more than others, you know, some who are trying their hardest to go back to the faith that they once knew. But then to have this sort of case on them, you would have thought maybe some of them would have backed off and been like, I don't want to touch this, you know, like I did feel that Ben, sort of like the editor, the Whitehead editor and stuff like that, he I felt that he sort of was more of that temperament where it was like, you know, I think it was 53% at the time of Boston was Catholic.
Yeah.
So I think he felt the pressure. It was like, don't touch it. You know, this is conflicting with us. You know, it's Boston. It's very Catholic. This story could be very dangerous. But I feel it was interesting that even Sasha, who was going back to church with her grandmother, again, I don't know if this is dramatised more. Maybe she did have some more reservations, but I don't feel it from you know, the book and what was said. But that she was wanting to, you know, going to Phil Saviano of Snap, you know, who brought them the case file and stuff like that 5 years after he originally did. You know, the fact that she went back and, you know, she did a lot of the groundwork and she did talk to a lot of the victims. I felt that was really good, because as much as they're trying to put you know, they've got this religious background, or they've got this, how they've grown up, they're sort of putting it to a side, really. Yeah. Sort of going, we're actually concentrating on maybe not the fact that it's a church, but the fact that it's a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there are one of the things about the film that was really interesting for me was that I did start to feel angry, but later.
Yeah.
There were a couple of scenes where, and they were very, very well put together scenes, just in terms of just the writing, the cinematography, everything. And it was where Robbie, which is Michael Keaton's character, was sitting in a bar and was confronted by, I don't know the actor's name, which is really bad, but was confronted by a member of Cardinal Law's sort of inner circle.
Yes.
And they talked before in the film, and, you know, been fairly civil, and it was always that sort of, that really interesting smile that some actors have.
Yeah.
Of the, I'm gonna smile to your face, but I can stab you in the back if I want to.
Yeah.
And it's just that great smile, and they're talking about how this story's gonna hit, and there is a threat in there, and it's when the system realizes it's under threat and doesn't do the right thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it better.
Yeah.
And it absolutely can. It'll be hard for a while, but it's the point where they say, no, you're the troublemaker.
Yeah.
It's a few bad apples. It's nothing to do with us.
Yeah, which there was a lot of that, the few bad apples. That was like
that
a
phrase
recurring
kept coming
theme.
up. But I think part of the thing that, and with the thing of the characters all being either lapsed Catholics or Catholic, you know, brought up Catholic or thing, one of the things that I really appreciated that the film didn't do was at no point did any of them say, oh, it could have been me. Yeah.
I think there was a moment where Mark Ruffalo's character said, you know, this could have happened to any one of us. But I don't think anyone ever said it could have been me.
Yeah.
They said it could have been any one of us. I believe he could have been saying it as just Spotlight, but I think it could have been as a Bostonian.
Yeah.
I think he meant it as like it could have been any one of us in Boston.
Yeah, I think it was the wider circle.
Well, that's how I took
yes,
it anyway. I
yeah.
took it as a
And
wider
obviously
feel.
it's open to interpretation, but and I think that it was the point where the church, and obviously it's dramatized, and it's not a documentary, so it's take all of it with a pinch of salt. But it was the point where the anger for me really came in, that it was, we're not going to do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then another sort of almost parallel scene to that is where Robbie goes to confront his friend, the lawyer,
Yes.
who has settled loads of these cases,
Yes.
and says, I need you to confirm these things for me.
Yeah.
And the lawyer friend, to start with, is very aggressive and says, like, get out of my house and all this sort of stuff, and then does the right thing. Like, to start with, he's using the I was just doing my job defense, which we all know is a rubbish defense anyway.
Yeah.
But it's the thing, he gets to the point where he can't do the wrong thing anymore.
Yeah.
And it's what the church actually is supposed to be for. It's supposed to teach you to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And it didn't, and nobody did for such a long time.
Yeah.
And that's where the film sort of convinced me that it was a worthwhile exercise.
Yeah.
Like, to start with, it was great. It was really good. It was fast-paced, and it was moving really well. And the drama that they managed to get into cross-referencing charts and stuff was amazing. But it was at that point where I thought, this is why they've made it a drama.
Yeah, yeah. I can see that. It was kind of, there's many different, like, the idea that, the sort of the underlying threat, I think, from the church's side was the fact that you're like, it's the church. It kind of became sort of this like threat that it was like, it's the church, not, oh, it's the church, or like, it's the way in which they said it as like, it's such a bigger thing than you are, so don't even try and go up against it. That was kind of that recurring theme, and I think that was, that thing that it was like, it was almost making itself a higher power that maybe they believed that they were, but actually it's kind of like, this was supposed to be an institution of trust, and people who connect us to God and things like that, and yet they're massively abusing that power, and yet they're still trying to keep it held so high on a pedestal that they're referring to as the church, that the emphasis on it.
Yeah, capital C.
Yeah, exactly. It like what I thought was really, which they did a few times. I think it may have been like 3 times they did it. But when referring to the new editor, they, the first sort of like main part, especially when they found out what he was like asking them to do, was the fact that they're like, he's a Jew. Like, isn't he a Jew? Like, oh, the Jew. It was kind of like, this suddenly was like, he's branded an outsider almost from the beginning. Not just because he's come from somewhere else, not because he's come from, like, I think it was New York or, Los Angeles or wherever he'd been, and he'd like been to a few different posts. There was obviously that underlying factor, but the fact that there was that little jab of, he's a Jew.
Yeah.
It was like, suddenly it's like, he's not one of us. He's not part of us. He doesn't get it.
Yeah.
He doesn't get,
he
like,
doesn't understand
who we
Boston.
Are.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of, it was the idea that it's just, like, even people, at that conversation that you said at the bar with one of those guys, it was that, that he's trying to say, it's like, oh, come on, he's a Jew, oh, he doesn't understand, because it was just a really interesting way in which they tried to sort of segue that it's like, oh, he doesn't understand because he's not one of us. I believe it was the guy that we're talking about is it Pete Connolly? I think it was.
That sounds right. Yeah.
That was not the actor's name. That's the character's name.
No,
but he was. I believe he was sort of heading like the church fund charity, or like the charity for the church, the Catholic Church. But so he sort of like should have been someone who was on this, or like would fight it, or would work with Spotlight, and yet he was, if anything, the one putting the threat in, being like, it's the church, don't go against the church. And I think Jim Sullivan, who was the Robbie's lawyer friend, was the one that was like, was the first person that was like, it's the church, kind of like putting that foundation of like, back off, Robbie, you can't do this.
Yeah, you can't take them on.
Which I think almost was slightly infuriating, that it's like that. Well, not infuriating, but it's the idea that it is this power that we can't touch.
Yeah.
That it's, you want to go up against the church, you want to soothe the church. It was that whole idea of people were just completely like almost laughing at them, because they were like, really? you're going to do this? It was that
Yeah,
element of it.
and the book touches on that as well. It's the idea of this is such a fundamental part of people's lives around the world, not just in Boston.
Yeah.
But the fact that the idea that you're going up against this colossal edifice, but actually without necessarily realizing that the church is men and women.
Yeah.
It's people. It's what makes up any organization. Yeah. And yes, it's imposing, and they would argue that certain parts of them aren't fallible, as all humans are. We're not getting into that debate, but it's the idea that actually, no, this is wrong, and we have to face up to that fact, and the fact that we've not been doing anything about this. Because there's a great quote from Stanley Tucci's character, it's Mitch Garabedian, the lawyer, who says, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that
was a powerful line.
Yes, there were a lot of powerful lines, both in the book and in the film. But the film found some very quotable things. Yeah. And that's one of them. And and there's another sort of thing where at a fundraiser party, one of the characters tells Robbie to enjoy the party. Yeah. And it's just like, how could he possibly do that? Yeah. When he knows what he knows and he's investigating it, and it keeps getting worse. Yeah.
Well, I think like what was the thing which in the book, and I think they should have portrayed it maybe a bit more in the film, but the fact that it was like the mothers of the abused children who wrote to Cardinal Law, who obviously knew what was going on and allowed it to carry on. Be it he tried to move them around, tried to get them, on sick leave, in quotation marks.
Yes, the various euphemisms.
Yeah, it was, a writing to them saying like, this is what, I think it was one mother said, he's abused my 9 boys, or he's abused all my family and stuff like this, all my children. And it was almost the fact that they were ignored, and they were trying to reach out to the one man they thought could actually put a stop to it and go, look, they're reaching out going, please, Cardinal Law, save our children. That's essentially what they were doing. And then he just, he'd send back some like, half-hatted remark being like, oh, we're sorting it out. He's moving away. It's like, yeah, he's moving them to another parish. Yeah. To, not even like restricting them to being like, don't be, they're not allowed to be, with children unsupervised. They're not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that. There was no safety net to try and save the next load of children that could have been abused.
No, and that's one of the things that the film does quite well, is that one of the journalists has, I think it's, I can't remember his name, has a safe house for priests. Yeah. Near his house. Yeah. He finds the address in the church records that they're going through. Yeah. And at that point, it goes, no, even the safe houses, the refuge houses, where they're going for therapy or where they're going to be kept out of the parish, are in communities where children live. Yeah,
and the families won't know why they're in that house.
No,
it's not going to have a big sign on saying, this is for rehabilitated priests that have abused children. It's just going to be like a house with a vicar in, and so they'll be like, oh, a priest, or how they want to address them. But what sort of slightly, just quickly getting back to the mothers of these children.
Yes.
But the fact that what made me more, when reading the book, made me sort of more shocked, was the fact that other mothers and other members of the community and of the parish would almost try and be like, don't rat on them, don't tell people about the priest, don't go and tell your story. Because they sort of then would almost be treated like a pariah, and it's like they're trying to save children and save their children, and trying to let other families know. It's like, this priest, abused my, or sexually abused my children, and yet when they try and go and tell them about it or tell other people about it, they're sort of almost shunned. And it's like, you would have that. I just found that just sort of almost delirious, really. Yeah. Because you wouldn't have thought that. You would have thought that people would have gone, oh my goodness, this is what's going on, tell us more, what can we do, like what has he been doing to the, does he take them away, does he do it in our homes, what does he do? And it just sort of struck me that all these mothers were like, we were just isolated, like no one wanted to talk to us. We couldn't go to church anymore, and if we did, we had to sit at the back, or we had to stand at the back. And it was just that shocking thing that it's like, you would have thought as a church community they would have come together in a time of great need, and yet they all just sort of dissipated and just left the supposed black sheep away from the flock.
Yeah, and I think the film dealt with that way less than the book. I can't really, it featured victims as characters and showed their trauma and their pain very effectively.
Yeah.
But the idea that people were pushed out of the church was less touched on.
Yes.
There wasn't a character that was a mother of however many children who they talked to in the film, and they did do that in the investigation and talk about that quite a lot in the books, that there were, they talked about the letters, and they found the letters, but I feel it might have sort of taken away from the film's pacing.
Because I know that it was Mark Ruffalo's character, I believe it was Michael Resendez, excuse me, but I think it's the unsealed documents he gets. He does say, look, there's letters from mothers saying this, and I believe it's done in about maybe 30 seconds of like mentioning it. So it is mentioned, but I feel they should have maybe touched on it a bit more. Maybe when they were talking to the victims, maybe interviewed a mother.
Yes.
Saying this is what we went through. As much as it was like, you should hear from the victims, I think you should have also heard from the victims' parents at that time, and how they were isolated and how they were treated sort of almost with contempt for what they knew, and how they wanted to bring down this abominable person. And I think it was just that level of sort of, I just sort of almost despaired as I was reading it in the book, because it's just like all these mothers that tried to do something and they were paid off.
Yeah.
And they're just like, be quiet, keep your money, and then you can still come to church.
Yeah.
It'll all be fine. If you take this money, you can still come to church and it's fine. And because it's 53% Catholic, there's a lot of people that were going to church, big families. The church was making a lot of money from donations at that time. I believe it's dropped catastrophically since.
Yes,
the film, but since the investigation.
They covered that in the book a little bit more. They were talking about how badly it affected the donations and things, and the just astronomical figures, and some of them were good for the church. Like the level of settlements was small.
Yeah.
And you get to the point with it, particularly in the book, because the statistics are so stark on the page, that you are just disbelieving. Because 10 million for a settlement, when somebody has performed a sexual assault on a teenager, it's one is too many.
Yeah. And
it's hundreds and it's thousands, and you get to the point where you just think, why when somebody did something, because they did, it wasn't everybody was just closing ranks. People broke ranks, priests broke ranks, but people higher up in the church did nothing.
No.
Or they moved people around, and that didn't solve the problem.
No, and it's just it's just baffling that they went to. You would have just thought, it's like, if they've done it once, they're going to do it again. No matter how much rehabilitation. Like the Kagan. Oh, I can't never remember how to say it.
Gagan, I believe is how.
Gagan.
Yeah.
The sort of, which is the case that starts it all off.
Yeah, he's the trigger case.
He's the trigger case. It's 200 abused children over, I believe it's 30 years.
Yes.
And it's sort of like, he admits to therapists that he is attracted to young boys.
Yeah.
And that he's going to do it again.
Yeah.
And they're fully aware of this. And, I think it's psychiatrists who interview and therapists who interview him has said he's going to do it again. Like, there's no cure, but they just want, they obviously don't want the scandal of having to write off a priest because of what he's up to. Because I think there was that sort of that psychoanalyst in the film, and sort of they've done a lot of it in the book.
Yes.
You said it's 6% of priests act out.
Yes, he says, he actually, to quote him, he says in the film, it is a recognisable psychiatric phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's not a few bad apples.
Yeah.
He says, I would go so far as to say that it's recognisable.
Yeah.
As that, and you just think, if that's true, you know, it's, and the book asks this question quite a lot, it circles around to it quite a lot, of the idea of why these men chose to go into the church.
Yeah.
Was it because they weren't comfortable with who they are, or was it because they were and knew that they would have the access?
Yeah, because with the Gagin case, you know, they do interview him. I believe it's very early on when he's abused a few children. And they sort of say, you know, were you, because his father died, I believe, when he was 5, and he was raised by his mother and his mother's brother, his uncle. And they, you know, and they were like, you know, were you abused? Is this why you've done it? Are you acting out because it was done to you? And he says no. And you know, and he said I was never touched, or I was never, you know, abused or anything like that. I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up. You know, his uncle was actually I believe he was, well, I don't think he was a very high up, but he was a priest as well.
Yes, yeah.
But a very well respected one, and it was because of him that he got into the church anyway.
The book mentions his uncle's influence quite a few times, and he does get involved in the abuse cases as well.
Yeah. But I feel that it's just like, you know, it's not, and I think they say about a few others, that it's not just that. Maybe there were some that had the same experience where they were abused, and so they reenact the experience because that's sort of, you know, it's kind of what they believe would happen. But for most of them, none of them were actually traumatized as children. They actually had a lovely childhood, and so it's sort of that begs to differ of like, well, what has made them do this? Which obviously we can't answer, because, you know, it's one of those things where we don't even know, because like they admit to it but they don't really go fully into it, because obviously the book would be, you know, super thick.
It would
you
be
know,
it would be War and Peace levels.
Yeah, they'd be here all day. But you know, it's just but it's of all of that's happened, what sort of you know, of the whole book and of the film, what makes me more frustrated is the nonchalant, sort of flippant attitude that the church has, as in by saying it's a few bad apples, and also of Eric McLeish, who is the lawyer who settles the cases, well, one of the lawyers who settles the cases.
Yes, he's quite an interesting character in the film. The way they sort him in the film, when he's sort of saying, "Oh, I can't talk to you about that sort of stuff," because he starts out quite pleasant. And he's talking to them, and he's talking to Sasha and Robbie, and seems very civil and very nice. And then he sort of starts to not hide behind court privilege, because that's how the court works, and it's actually a good thing in terms of some cases should not be elaborated upon in public because they are very sensitive. However, when it's this, you know, it's that very moral grey area, but he starts to get to the point where he becomes and turns a little bit. Yeah. But then again, he turns back because he confronts Robbie with the fact that he actually sent this information himself before.
I think the flippancy of where it does come off, it's either they've done it to be like, oh, all lawyers are like that, or like the dramatic effect where they're like, you know, oh, you know, they got paid, you know, it's just a few cases, they got the dough and they're gone. Yes. It's kind of that flippancy of just kind of, oh yeah, they've just got money and they can just go off and live their lives.
Yes, because money helps with this kind of problem. Of course it does.
No, exactly. You know, and it's just kind of, it's just the way in which it was portrayed, and then how it was in the book. But I suppose the book really doesn't, I don't think, comprehend as the man. It's kind of maybe like of the circumstance of like, maybe, you know, he couldn't say because it is privileged, it's, you know, it is closed documents. Yeah. But I think maybe they might have made, for the film, they might have made him a bit less caring, or maybe the flippancy was just because maybe he believed they actually didn't care. And so, you know, because of him saying, you know, we sent this to you 5 years ago and you didn't do anything. Yeah. So why are you caring now? It could have been that, or it could have just been that they're trying to play up to the stereotypical lawyer image of just, I got paid, who cares?
Yes, yeah, because the film does suffer from a few two-dimensional characters.
Yeah.
It really does, because even though I really like the fundraising character, whose name again I've completely forgotten.
Was it Pete Connolly?
Pete, yeah. When I like that actor, I think he is very good in that role, but there's not a lot to him in terms of character, and I think that's where the adaptation struggles.
Yes.
Because it's trying to do so much, and we've already been like, oh, it should have done more, it should have featured there, but it's trying to do so much, and it is a very important film.
Yes.
With again, with a capital I, a capital F, and even before the Academy Award and everything, I think part of it is that they've got so much information to get through.
Yeah.
And that's where the book is better, because it is able to do that with more time.
Yeah, I feel that it's like the film is very good, and it does portray a lot, and I think it's good that it focuses a lot on the journalistic side of it and what they had to go through to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I feel that it's an interesting aspect of that they were trying to be thwarted by the church, but in a sort of non-threatening way, and also the hoops that they had to go through to get all of the information that they needed. What I feel the book was better at was actually laying out all the facts and giving us all the information, which they didn't do in the film. There were some elements that were left out. There were some cases that were left out that we didn't hear of, and I feel that's where it, but one of those things, it's a non-fiction piece trying to make it dramatic.
Yes.
There's elements which, for running time, for plot purposes, they can't do, which we understand. But I feel there were a lot of things that should have gone in that weren't.
Yeah, and at the end of the film, spoilers, there are a few sort of slides about about just how many cases there were, what happened to Cardinal Law after the case hit, which we need to talk about, but just the sheer number of cities that it puts up. It's everywhere. It's South America, it's England, it's Europe, it's
Canada, it's Japan, it's everywhere.
And that's where the dramatic side of the film lets itself down.
Yes.
Because it can't feature that until a slide at the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
which I felt was what was coming up. Was they were going to do the what happened after this.
Yes.
Which you could see was coming, but I feel it was, it is like it's a text up on the screen, a big screen, being like, this is how many cases there were, this is how many people affected, these are all the cities in which it affected. But I feel that it was done in almost a minute.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas,
and I think it's very interesting that they chose to do it that way, because earlier when they were looking at all of the priests and looking at the way that they've been sort of coded in terms of absent or on sick leave, or the various codes that they've used to actually denote that they were in treatment for paedophilia. Despite the fact that it was just looking through tables, they'd chosen to make that a dramatic scene in the film where they were like scrolling down frantically and trying to find all of these people, and then at the end they just wanted to show the sheer scale of it. The decision they made was to just put up text on a screen. Yeah.
I also feel that I don't know if they should have included it, but I don't know if it was important. But the Vatican's response to the film alone, was interesting, because they actually all applauded it, and said that it was a necessary sort of, almost like, to see how far we've come, almost to see that it's like they're happy that the responsible people have been named and have come to the attention and have been profiled, so that people are aware. But I also feel that maybe they're trying to, I don't know, this is just my interpretation of it, they could be trying to say that maybe to try and get people more on side, to be like, well, if the Catholic Church approves of it, then we and we approve of it, then maybe they're of the like-minded. That's probably a bit controversial to say, but I don't know, because I feel that To be fair to the film, like as the film itself, they didn't attack the Catholic Church per se.
No.
They attacked the certain archdiocese of the Boston area.
Yes.
They didn't say like, oh, this is all the Vatican's fault, or
No.
oh, everybody's doing this.
No.
They just knew of it in Boston.
And part of it, I think that the point where the film ends is quite interesting because it's just after the story hits. It's just after it's published, and it goes to the Spotlight office, and Robbie and Mike are walking in on a Sunday. We know that Sasha and the other colleague, whose name I can't remember, are there just in case there are phone calls. There are so many phone calls. And that's where the film ends. It doesn't give time for the church to properly respond. And it's a great dramatic point to end it. It's a really good ending.
It is.
But then for them to do the couple of slides and mention that Cardinal Law has been moved to a prestigious church in Rome. Like it feels like it's taken away from that. It's a bit. It's a bit of an odd point. And that's where the book has the advantage because it's got the 2015 edition. And it's got the afterword and it shows you what's happened.
It's got the aftermath and it's got the continuation.
And obviously we have a very different church now to how it was because of a different pope and a different attitude, and he has been interesting about these cases in terms of his in annoying other elements of the church. And so I think that the book has the advantage of hindsight in a way that the film obviously can't yet, but may never, because films don't necessarily work like that.
I feel if they, like you said, if they did it like a documentary, they could have had, elements at the end of like how far they've come, what's happening next, sort of like the continuation of it. And that's what the book can do. The book can tell us more. The book can say, right, what's the stories here? In the nearly 15 years since the story broke, what has happened since? Whereas the story, it just kind of ends, and it's just kind of in the film, and it's just kind of, well, lots of people feel like it. The phones are ringing. Oh, and this is how many people, and that was it. And you're kind of like, well, what happened? What further action was taken? Like, yes, it was like sort of said about sort of main figures, but you sort of don't know. Like, you want to know sort of maybe more about, what policies or what procedures were taken in after that. Like, what did the church do to make sure that this wasn't going to happen again? How could they reconstruct their system of what to do in this situation? And I feel that that's what lacked in the film, whereas the book massively made up for that. And
that is a restriction of the media. Really. It's just how it works. But I think the way that the film was structured also with Cardinal Law, just really quickly, I wanted to talk about him. He's not in it that much.
He's really not in it.
Whereas he's a big focus of the book because
he's
of
almost
what he
like
did.
the main, if it were a fiction, the main antagonist. Really, like he's almost on every other page.
If a non-fiction book can have an antagonist, in the same
almost
way.
in the way.
But he's in 4 or 5 scenes,
which I feel detracts from his responsibility. I feel like as much as they do say Law knew, or like he was part of it, or these are the messages from him, he only had like one interview, which was about 2 minutes, where he was like welcoming the new editor,
and giving him the catechism.
There was no word from him on like why has this been going on, or like trying to interview him. Maybe they couldn't, well, I know they couldn't, but maybe it would have been interesting just to have seen what they could have done. Sort of almost hypothetically done on film, which they couldn't do in reality.
Because I mean, there was the point where they were trying to contact his office and contact his press officer and all this sort of stuff, and they just said, "We're not talking about this." And that felt, whilst probably accurate, felt like they'd missed a dramatic beat.
I feel there could have been almost not a showdown, but there could have been that sort of almost you're going up against the main sort of person and the person who has been responsible, and allowing all this to go. Essentially, almost the baddie of the film.
But again, it's how far they could push the truth, because that showdown never really happened
that's true.
Anyway.
I suppose that's true, but I do feel like I agree with you that Law should have done more.
And they do change things for the film. And so you wonder, and it might have made it more cliche. It's difficult. We're not filmmakers.
But
it's the thing where you think, well, you've changed quite a lot.
Yeah.
Why did you feel that maybe that wasn't,
Yeah.
worth
no,
doing?
I completely agree.
And there are confrontations, as I say, the bar scene and the scene where Robbie goes to visit his friend
Jim Sullivan.
Jim.
Yeah,
It's those confrontations.
Yeah.
Those are the more sort of personable ones, whereas law and the church become sort of an amorphous shadow in the background.
Yes, like that. There is a lot of the whole like the imagery of just there's small houses or small. Like certain institutions, and then it's just like overshadowed by the large church next to it's the dramatic imagery of the church is always above and over you. And the church stands over you. The church is greater than you are.
And there's a scene that typifies that when Sasha and one of the victims are walking along, and
the church is in the background.
And he just goes, and of course there's a church there.
Yeah, there's like a church behind them. There's a church in front of them.
They're in a park. There are kids around. It's just it's very the film is very well crafted. It is, but I felt they missed a beat there.
Well, it's that because it was that imagery of just like there's a massive church and there's a tiny playground. So the idea that it's this innocence, it's this tiny innocence, and yet it's being overshadowed by this massive force or this massive sort of like system. So I think it was very interesting, but the main factor of it all now is, what did you prefer? Like, what did you think was better? Was the book better or was the film better? Because obviously we'll be using this as a hashtag.
Yes.
As we always do.
And it's very difficult because they are very different and they use very different techniques to get their points across.
Yes.
And obviously the articles won Pulitzer Prize. The film has now won Best Picture at the Oscars. They're both award-winning. I'm still coming down on the book.
I'm going to have to agree with you on that.
Yeah.
This morning I was thinking maybe the film's better, and it is very well done.
It is, absolutely.
And it's very good.
But I've been very persuasive, so it's fine.
No, absolutely. But I feel if it was a documentary, this decision would have been a bit harder.
Yes.
I feel that would have made it a lot.
Yes, but again, I don't know how they would have done the documentary.
No, that's true, and I suppose that's for that's for an alternate universe, I suppose. But I feel that the book really, really nailed. It gave us the information. It gave us all the accounts we needed. It gave us the full picture. Whereas I feel the book just started to get really into it, and then just as kind of more was going on, like the after effect, we didn't.
I think you mean it the other way around. I think you said the film did this and then the book did that, but I think I may be getting confused.
That's
but
right.
no,
I
the
feel
film started getting.
The
into
film
it,
started getting.
And then the book.
I'm sorry if I have said that the wrong way around. That's why I felt the film was starting to build and give us what we needed, but then it stopped at the crucial moment.
Yeah.
Whereas the book had everything for us.
Yeah.
It gave us all of the things we needed. So that I would definitely say the book was better.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. Well,
good.
There we go.
Good. We agree. We've first agreement.
With first agreement, we've got that down. So, thank you very much for listening today. We're back now. We'll be definitely back each week now.
Yes.
Because we've got everything sorted. So do let us what you know. We're still on Twitter, which is the either hashtag Morlock Me or also at Morlock Me. We are on YouTube. I did say on Twitter that we're thinking of possibly doing an Instagram page. Please do let us know what you think about that. Next week, I believe we'll be doing The Martian.
That's the plan.
That is the plan.
I need to rewatch and reread.
We'll have to get more prepared for that. But I believe The Martian should be next. But thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye bye.